Have you ever been so in love with someone that you let them lie right to your face and you said absolutely nothing?
Oof. Yeah, that is a heavy question to start with.
Right. Because, well, the uncomfortable truth we are unpacking today is that we don't just tolerate the lies in our relationships. We often actually help tell them.
We really do. We participate in the illusion.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are jumping straight into a genuinely fascinating and honestly a slightly dangerous set of excerpts from the Lustscenes series.
Oh, it really is.
It's this discussion titled Pretty Little Liar, and it is effectively like a masterclass in dissecting the architecture of emotional manipulation.
Yeah, it completely strips away all those, comforting illusions we have about romance.
Totally.
The mission for our deep dive today is to really explore those highly uncomfortable gray areas of love. We're going to look at everything from everyday, seemingly harmless dating strategies to highly toxic gaslighting,
The dark stuff.
the really dark stuff. But more importantly, we are going to figure out the psychological mechanics behind it all, like why people manipulate those they claim to cherish and why we're just so prone to tolerating the intolerable.
Okay, let's unpack this because the argument made in these transcripts starts with a premise that immediately puts you on the defensive.
It really does.
It asserts that every single one of us has either manipulated a partner, been manipulated, or actively enabled it. There's just no opting out.
No one is safe.
Right. You can't just listen to this and think, well, I'm the good guy, so this doesn't apply to my love life.
Well, what's fascinating here is how quickly the discussion dismantles that whole binary idea of, the innocent victim and the evil mastermind.
Right, the cartoon villain.
Exactly. The individuals speaking in the Pretty Little Liar discussion, they openly acknowledge operating on both sides of that dynamic throughout their lives.
Which is so refreshing, honestly.
Yeah, it is. They remove the moral safety nets right from the beginning. And that forces you, as the listener, to lower your own defenses and scrutinize your own behavior without the comfort of self-righteousness.
But to actually scrutinize our behavior, we have to clearly define the crime, right?
Absolutely.
We have to figure out what actually constitutes manipulation versus what is just, I don't know, standard human interaction.
Which is getting harder to do these days.
It is, because the word manipulation gets thrown around so casually now. It's basically the internet's favorite buzzword for any interpersonal friction we happen to find annoying.
Oh, 100%.
Like if someone takes 4 hours to text back, suddenly they're a master manipulator.
It has absolutely become this diluted catch-all term. We just pathologize normal dating friction because, honestly, it's easier to label someone toxic than to admit we just have incompatible communication styles.
Right. So let me test a scenario on you to find where that line actually is.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the early stages of dating. Is it just a stage play where we are all performing, or is it an emotional hostage situation?
That's a great way to put it.
So, say I have a difficult conversation coming up with my partner, and I deliberately wear a specific outfit, like one that I know for a fact drives them crazy and will distract them.
I see where you're going with this.
Am I just playing the game, or have I crossed into emotional imprisonment?
Well, the discussion in our material provides a highly specific, very effective metric for answering that exact question. They call it the transparency test.
The transparency test, okay.
Yeah. It dictates that the dividing line between a harmless dating strategy and actual manipulation comes down entirely to the underlying intention.
Wait, so intention is the sole dividing line?
That's what the source argues, yes.
Because I could argue I'm wearing that great outfit to a difficult conversation just to, give myself a confidence boost. Am I manipulating them simply by trying to feel grounded and powerful in my own skin?
See, that nuance is exactly why the transparency test is so vital. Manipulation at its core is when you engineer another person's emotional state to get what you want.
Right.
And you do it completely disregarding the cost to them. So the transparency test asks you to run a thought experiment.
Which is?
Would you still execute your behavior if your partner were handed a transcript of your exact internal monologue?
Oh, wow. That's terrifying.
Right. If you would be deeply ashamed or embarrassed for them to see your true motives, you have almost certainly crossed into manipulation.
Okay, applying that to the outfit scenario. If my internal monologue is, I'm nervous, I want to wear my favorite shirt so I stand tall, and my partner sees that thought, they might just think it's endearing.
Exactly. That passes the test.
But if my internal thought process is, I'm going to wear this so they get flustered and lose their train of thought, making them feel insecure so I can win this argument.
which is a very different vibe.
Yeah, that fails spectacular.
Yeah. Because in that second scenario, you are actively engineering their reality to put them at a disadvantage. You don't care that you are inducing confusion or insecurity.
I just want to win.
Right. You only care about extracting your desired outcome. It is the covert, parasitic nature of the intention that makes it toxic.
And what's terrifying is how this scales up. The discussion points out that it starts with these little micro-performances, but it escalates until the manipulated person essentially becomes a prisoner in their own mind.
The tipping point is just brutal.
It really is. It's described as the moment when someone can no longer trust their own sensory inputs or emotions.
Yeah, when you have successfully made reality so unstable for your partner that they start doubting their own memory and sanity.
Which is the definition of gaslighting.
Exactly. That is the clinical threshold for gaslighting, which is just one of several highly destructive behaviors categorized here.
The breakdown includes gaslighting, but it also dives into love bombing, hot and cold behavior, and something they call weaponized silence.
That last one is intense.
Very. But I want to make sure we don't just list these off like buzzwords. Let's break down the mechanics. For instance, love bombing.
Right.
People assume that's just a partner being overly enthusiastic and buying flowers on a second date.
That is a massive misconception. Buying flowers is just enthusiasm. Love bombing is an overwhelming, highly calculated saturation of affection.
It's like a flood.
Exactly. It's attention and grand gestures designed to create immediate emotional dependency. The psychological mechanism relies on spiking the victim's dopamine.
So it's basically a chemical hook.
Completely. The love bomber makes the target feel like they are the absolute center of the universe, and it moves at breakneck speed.
And then what happens?
Well, the goal is to establish such a profound emotional debt that when the bomber eventually pulls back, the victim goes into literal dopamine withdrawal. They start scrambling to recreate that initial high.
Which feeds perfectly into the hot and cold dynamic. It's not just someone being moody, right? It's intermittent reinforcement.
Yes, that's exactly the term.
It's turning the relationship into a slot machine. You don't know if you're going to get the jackpot, the warm, loving partner, or the cold shoulder. And psychologically, human beings get incredibly addicted to unpredictable rewards.
Exactly that. I mean, B.F. Skinner proved it decades ago with rats in a box, and we just do it to each other in living rooms.
Wow. Yeah, that's dark.
The unpredictability creates a trauma bond. And that ties directly into the most chilling tactic discussed in the source, weaponized silence.
That one gave me pause.
Yeah.
Because taking space to cool down after a blowout fight is healthy.
Of course it is.
If I say, I need an hour, don't talk to me, that's setting a boundary.
Yeah.
But weaponized silence is entirely different. It's using your absence as a blunt instrument to create panic.
It's about control.
Yeah. You are forcing the other person to scramble, to beg, to apologize for things they didn't even do, solely to get you to acknowledge their existence.
And if we run that through the transparency test we talked about earlier, imagine having to hand your partner a card that says, I am actively ignoring you for 3 days, specifically to induce feelings of abandonment so that you will submit to my demands.
Oh my God. The entire power structure would collapse instantly.
It would. Manipulation is a fungus. It only survives in the dark.
That is such a good way to put it. So if manipulation relies on keeping the victim in the dark, the obvious next question is, how exactly do people plunge the room into darkness in the first place?
Right. What are the tools?
Exactly. And that takes us straight into the mechanics of social conditioning. The Pretty Little Liar discussion wades into some deeply controversial waters here regarding gender dynamics.
It does, and it's really important to frame this carefully for everyone listening. The speakers in the material are not establishing absolute biological laws.
Right, we're not dealing in absolutes here.
No, they are impartially observing broad sociological patterns based on how different groups are socialized from childhood.
Absolutely. The initial debate they have in the source is about who manipulates more, men or women. But someone quickly points out that this is an entirely useless scoreboard.
Right. Who cares who does it more?
Exactly. It's not a question of frequency, it's a question of methodology. It's about how the tactics differ based on what society permits us to do.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the material argues that men, generally speaking, are conditioned to manipulate through a tactic called access.
Access, meaning the control of physical and emotional presence.
Yes.
Being everywhere when they want something and evaporating when they don't.
Yeah, it's controlling the dial on the relationship. But to understand the why behind this, the text says we have to look at how traditional masculinity operates.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Men are often socialized to view stoicism, independence, and self-reliance as their primary virtues. Society historically penalizes men for articulating vulnerability or emotional need.
So if a guy feels deeply insecure that his partner is pulling away, he feels like he isn't allowed to just sit down and say, hey, I feel neglected and scared right now.
Precisely. To say that will be seen under toxic frameworks as a weakness. So he reasserts his control over the dynamic through his presence.
By withdrawing.
Exactly. He withdraws access, he leaves texts unread, he becomes physically distant but remains just present enough to keep her guessing.
It's like a ghosting hybrid.
Yeah. He uses his absence as his voice because he was never given the acceptable vocabulary to use his actual voice. It's a manipulation of availability to regain a feeling of power.
Oh, okay. And then the material contrasts this male tactic of access with how women are conditioned to manipulate, which they define as emotion and framing.
Emotion and framing, yes.
Meaning maneuvering the emotional reality of a situation so the partner somehow always ends up feeling like the villain.
Yeah.
Often for crimes they had no idea they were committing.
It's a very subtle rewriting of the narrative. Instead of withdrawing physical access, the framing tactic involves altering the emotional temperature of the room.
So the partner is just constantly confused.
Right. The other person is constantly on the defensive, perpetually feeling like they're failing the relationship without knowing exactly why.
But the underlying psychology here, I think I see the exact parallel to the male issue of stoicism.
How so?
Why would a woman use framing instead of just stating a direct need? Well, the text points out that women are socialized from birth to be accommodating. Direct demands are actively punished.
That's a huge point.
Right. If a woman is assertive about what she wants, she's labeled bossy, demanding, or too much.
You've hit on the core sociological tragedy highlighted in the text. If you are taught that going straight through the front door to get your needs met makes you unlikable or aggressive, you learn to pick the lock on the side window.
Oh, that's brilliant. You picked the lock.
Yeah. You learn to orchestrate a scenario where your partner eventually offers you what you wanted, so you never had to risk the vulnerability of formally demanding it.
You manipulate the frame so they think it was their idea.
Exactly.
But look at the absolute wreckage this causes. The discussion points out the ultimate tragedy of this gendered socialization.
It's so sad, really.
It is. You end up with two people sitting in a living room, neither of them speaking their actual truth.
Yeah.
One is managing access to hide their insecurity. The other is managing the emotional frame to hide their needs, and both of them are utterly lost in translation.
It creates a profound, echoing loneliness within the partnership. You have two individuals flawlessly executing defense strategies against each other while both secretly starving for actual unarmored intimacy.
That is heartbreaking.
It really is.
And it transitions us perfectly from the clinical mechanics of manipulation into the visceral, lived reality of it.
The human element.
Yeah. We know the tactics now, the access, the framing, the love bombing. But what does it actually do to the human psyche to be on the receiving end of this from someone you sleep next to?
Well, the material uses a very specific, haunting metaphor to capture the victim's perspective. It equates the experience to being out on a small boat with your partner in the middle of a vast lake.
The sinking boat. Let's paint this picture, because it explains the exact mechanism of self-deception better than anything else I've read.
It's a powerful visual.
So you are on this boat, the water is perfectly calm, the sun is shining, you have zero reason to feel anxiety, so you completely trust the environment.
Everything feels safe.
Exactly. But then, one day, you happen to look down at your feet, and you realize there is water pooling at your ankles. The boat has been sinking the entire time.
And the devastating revelation isn't just that the boat is going down, it's that the person sitting across from you, the person whose hand you were holding, has been wearing a life jacket beneath their coat the entire trip.
Ugh, that hits hard.
And they never once mention it to you.
That captures the asymmetrical risk of emotional manipulation so perfectly. You believed you were sharing the vulnerability, sharing the danger of the deep water. But they had an exit strategy, a protective layer of deception that they hid from you.
They knew the boat was taking on water. In many cases of manipulation, they're the ones quietly drilling the holes.
Right.
Yet they insulated themselves while letting you believe the structural integrity of the relationship was fine.
But the question that immediately follows is, how do you not notice your own boat is sinking?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If the water is rising, why do we stay seated? And the realization presented in the text is that manipulation only works long-term because we actively let it work.
It's the mechanism of incremental boundary pushing. It's akin to the boiling frog syndrome, but applied to human affection. The manipulator doesn't flood the boat all at once.
It's gradual.
Very. They tell a small lie here. They dismiss a valid feeling there. They utilize weaponized silence for an hour, then apologize. The water rises 1 millimeter at a time.
And before you know it,
Yeah, by the time it's at your shins, you've already spent months normalizing the fact that your ankles are wet.
we gaslight ourselves.
Yeah.
That is such a bitter pill to swallow.
It's a tough reality to face.
We want the fairy tale, the calm water, to be our reality so desperately that we actively choose to ignore the cold water rising around us. Our gut instinct screams, they are lying, this isn't right, but our heart overrides it.
Saying, no, look at how beautiful the horizon is. Don't rock the boat.
Exactly. We end up loving the person more than we trust our own internal alarm system.
The irony is that self-deception acts as a short-term survival mechanism that guarantees long-term destruction. Confronting the reality that the person you love is capable of letting you drown is too neurologically painful.
So your brain simply chooses not to see the water.
Exactly.
Okay, so that explains why we stay on the boat. But we have to look at the perpetrator's perspective too, as uncomfortable as that is. Why hide the life jacket? If these people aren't cartoon villains twirling their mustaches, what psychological mechanism drives them to drill holes in their own relationship?
Well, the material offers a highly empathetic, yet entirely uncompromising analysis of the manipulator's mind. It posits that, especially in younger or less emotionally developed individuals, the manipulation isn't always a conscious, malicious plot.
It's not always calculated.
No. At its absolute core, this toxic behavior is driven by a profound, all-consuming fear.
But what are they actually afraid of? It can't just be a simple fear of being alone.
It's deeper than that. It's the terror of unworthiness. It's a fundamental belief that their authentic, unedited self is not enough to keep a partner around.
That's heartbreaking in its own way.
It is. They are terrified of abandonment, yes, but specifically because they believe that if they just stand in the light and say, this is who I am, you will inevitably leave them.
So they panic.
Right. Because they cannot trust their own worth, they decide they have to trust control.
Ah. So they manage the narrative. If I can't guarantee you'll stay because I'm great, I'll guarantee you'll stay by making you confused.
Precisely. If they keep you slightly off balance, if they manage your access to them, if they continually frame you as the one making mistakes,
then you're too busy to leave.
exactly. You will be entirely too preoccupied with trying to fix the relationship to ever realize you possess the agency to just walk away. They intentionally cultivate an environment of uncertainty because your anxiety ensures your presence.
And they falsely label that control love. They truly believe that gripping a partner so tightly that the partner can't breathe is the ultimate sign of devotion.
They catastrophically confuse the anxiety of potential loss with the intimacy of actual connection. But true love inherently requires freedom.
It really does.
The moment you have to trick someone into staying on the boat, you no longer have a partner, you have a captive.
So let's play this out to its logical conclusion. The inevitable happens. The truth comes out.
It always does.
The boat finally goes under, the secret life jacket is exposed, and the betrayal is laid bare. What happens next? This brings us to the ultimate and easily the most polarizing debate within the source material.
It is the absolute stress test of human connection.
The question is this: can you truly love someone after they have fundamentally betrayed you? Not just coexist with them, not just tolerate them for the sake of history or children, but actually fully choose them, again, love them.
The discussion presents two distinctly opposing philosophies on this aftermath.
The first one being the unconditional argument. Break down the mechanics of that view for us.
View 1 argues an immediate, resilient yes. The underlying philosophy here is that love is not a transactional currency. It is not a paycheck handed out only when a partner meets their performance metrics.
Right.
The argument states that human beings are deeply, inherently flawed, and a betrayal might not indicate that the person is fundamentally malicious.
It's the idea that a betrayal is just a gruesome unveiling of their true self. The parts of them they were too terrified to show you directly.
Exactly. This view suggests that if your love vanishes the moment they display their brokenness, then it wasn't actually love. It was merely a contract for good behavior.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. True unconditional love means looking at the ugliest, most fearful parts of a person, the parts that lied to you, and choosing to love those broken layers too.
I understand the romantic poetry of that view. I really do. but I have to push back hard against it, utilizing the counter-argument presented in the material itself.
Let's hear it.
Because view 2, which focuses on the requirement of safety, argues that the unconditional view is a one-way ticket to emotional ruin. View 2 states that love is never ever enough on its own.
It is a radically pragmatic counterstance.
It has to be. Because the brutal reality is that you can absolutely love someone with the entirety of your being and still recognize objectively that they are a danger to your mental health.
Yes.
Conflating the two, believing that because you feel deep affection for them, they must inherently be a safe harbor, is the exact trap door that people fall through when they stay in abusive dynamics.
It requires separating the emotional experience of affection from the logical assessment of physical and psychological safety.
Exactly.
You can love the person who drilled holes in the boat, but you shouldn't get back in a boat with them.
So what does this all mean? When we are caught between these two massive concepts, the idealistic beauty of unconditional love versus the absolute necessity of personal safety, how do we navigate the wreckage of a betrayal?
The material synthesizes these opposing views into one singular, highly practical metric for the listener. It accepts the reality that over a long enough timeline, every partner will eventually cause pain.
We're human.
We are human, we fail each other. Therefore, the defining metric of a relationship isn't the absence of hurt.
What is the metric?
When the betrayal happens and the pain is actively in the room, do they come towards you or do they hide?
Do they come towards you or do they hide? That is so clear.
When the glass shatters, does your partner step into the discomfort, take total accountability without managing the narrative, and get on their hands and knees to sweep up the glass alongside you?
Right. Or do they retreat into their defensive conditioning? Do they employ weaponized silence? Do they try to frame you for dropping the glass? Do they hide behind their emotional life jacket?
That cuts right through the noise. It doesn't matter how much they claim to love you. If their instinct is to hide from accountability, the safety is completely gone. And love cannot breathe in a room without safety.
A relationship can absolutely survive a mistake. It can survive immense pain, but it cannot survive a partner who refuses to stand in the wreckage with you.
That is incredibly profound. And it brings us to the close of our deep dive into the Lustscenes excerpts today. We have traversed some heavy psychological terrain.
We really have.
From the transparency test and the mechanics of dopamine-driven love bombing to the gendered tactics of access and framing, all the way to the sinking boat and the ultimate metric of safety.
It is dense, often confronting material, but it provides essential vocabulary for anyone trying to navigate modern intimacy. It really does. So, to you listening right now, if this resonated or if it made you squirm a little bit, maybe it's time to share this deep dive with someone.
It could spark a good conversation.
Send it to a friend who is constantly questioning their own memory in a relationship. Or, let's be real, just text the link to the person who left you on read for 3 days to manipulate your access, and then casually text it, hey, like nothing happened.
Let them know you see the mechanics.
Exactly. Let them know.
This raises an important question, though, before we finally sign off. We've dedicated this entire session to analyzing how other people manage the narrative. We looked at their tactics, their gaslighting, their hidden life jackets.
We did. We put the manipulators under the microscope.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, returning to the concept of the sinking boat. We discussed how we willingly ignore the rising water. We choose to gaslight ourselves because we are desperate for the fairy tale to be real.
We let the manipulation work.
So consider this. If we possess that immense capacity for self-deception, if we are that willing to ignore our own internal alarms just to avoid being alone, is the most dangerous manipulation we face in love. Actually, the lies our partners tell us, or the brutal truths we refuse to tell ourselves.
Yeah. And that is exactly why we do the deep dive. Think about that internal truth the next time you find yourself letting someone lie to your face and choosing to say nothing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us and exploring the messy mechanics of love today. Keep learning, keep questioning your reality, and we will see you next time.